Well, you guys know what time it is. We have a special episode, like I just mentioned. And it's not just a normal episode. When you talk about all things covered, we cover everything, right? And of course, me being a former defensive back, Pat P currently still playing at a top tier level in the defensive backfield, we felt like we needed to add a little more pizzazz to what we've been doing here on our show. So what we wanted to do, like I said, highlight the HBCU programs, highlight football in the HBCU conferences and things like that. So right now, this is an unbelievable experience for me. I have the luxury of talking to two iconic individuals. And because of that luxury that I have, you guys that are watching me and that are listening to me, you have the luxury of being able to hear this conversation or see this conversation with those said individuals. Number one, starting off with the head coach. Before you can get to the players, you got to get to the head coach, right? Pete Richardson, defensive back in the NFL for 3 seasons with the Buffalo Bills, head coach of Southern University for 17 years. He won 4 Black College National Championships, 5-time SWAC Coach of the Year, and not just Coach of the Year, but one of the more dominating presence that has ever stood on the sidelines in HBCU football history. Pete Richardson is joining us, and not just Pete Richardson, guys. We got another treat for you as well. I started with the head coach. Now we got to go to the player. Southern University alum, 14 NFL career vet, 8-time Pro Bowler, 3-time first-team All-Pro, 55 career interceptions. And I'm surprised to see he got 55 because at one point in time, they just wasn't even throwing his way. And he's a Pro Football Hall of Famer, played college football there at Southern as well. Like I said, Aeneas Williams is joining us here, all things covered. Coach Richardson, Aeneas Williamson, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. At the present time, having been retired and having watching some of these exciting games going on from week to week, and it's football season now.
I'm doing fantastic. Glad to be on with you, B-Mac. Excited to be on with Coach Richardson. Familiar with his career. He actually coached who I would call the original Honey Badger, which is Sean Wallace, very good friend of mine. So I'm excited. Thanks for having me on.
No doubt. A few episodes ago, we had the legendary Mel Blount join us here on the show. For the listeners and viewers that are currently watching us, if you missed that, go check us out on the podcast feed or the YouTube feed. And he highlighted Southern University as well. So I thought it would only be right that we continue to tap more into Southern University football. We tap more into HBCU as a whole, and that's what we're going to do here. There's a lot going on with HBCU programs. Number one, they're currently involved in their season because of the pandemic. The fall season was canceled, and now they're basically playing spring football, but they're playing ball games, real legit games in the spring, and they've been gaining a lot of attention. And there's a big game coming up on Saturday featuring Southern and Jackson State. Southern will be traveling to Jackson State. We want to highlight that game as well as talk about the past, present, and the future of HBCUs. But before we tap into that ball game, let's take a trip down memory lane, to say the least. When you look at Aeneas Williams, outstanding, prolific NFL career. But before he started to dominate on the NFL field, Aeneas dominated right there in Baton Rouge. How did you end up at Southern?
Well, Southern was a foregone conclusion. I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana. Grew up in the same area from Holly Grove, same area where Lil Wayne's from, and went to Forsyth High School. My dad's the first college graduate on both sides of the family, B-Mac. And my middle brother, who was my idol growing up, who's actually a CPA. He's the Baton Rouge Chamber of Commerce CFO, Achilles. He was already there. I wasn't recruited coming out of high school. I was a 0 star. And once I played on a very good team, a number of guys played in the league and played major college football from a high school called Forsyth High School.
Can you give us a few names?
Start with Maurice Hurst. Maurice Hurst was drafted in the 4th round, played 10 years cornerback with the New England Patriots. He graduated in 85. Mm-hmm. Kevin Lewis. And both of these guys, by the way, were my mentors. Ezra does a great job with the organization of mentorship. My whole life has been changed because of the power of mentorship.
Yep.
Kevin Lewis finished in 1984. He ended up playing cornerback with the 49ers when Ronnie Lott and all those guys, and they were winning. I finished in 86. Ashley Ambrose finished in 88. Ashley was drafted in the second round. I was drafted in the third round. But coming out of high school, I had no recruits. One school was going to give me a scholarship, Dartmouth, but it was more because of academics. Didn't want to go that far away from home. I wanted to graduate from Fortier in the month of May, BMAC. In June, I would start summer school at the Southern University and be in an apartment with my brother Achilles. And man, the rest was history. We'll talk about the other, how I ended up walking on and all those things. But that's how I ended up at the Southern University.
And Coach, the same question for you. I mean, you have some NFL ties. You played 3 seasons with the Buffalo Bills, but ultimately you found your home to be in Baton Rouge, standing on the sidelines for Southern University. But how did you get that opportunity?
Well, I was coaching in North Carolina at Winston-Salem State University, and we played Southern University up in Shreveport. And so now during that time, I had a chance to make a course evaluation of the players that they had on their team because we played against them. And then when the season was over, Coach called me from down here, Chasm, about the job became open. And I was real kind of reluctant to taking the job because they had a number of coaches that was transforming, coming in and out of Southern University. But I knew they had some great athletes on that football team. So I had to convince my wife to come down, and also had some relatives in this area, a brother that was down here. I'd been down here a couple of times, but I'd never been to the university. So I came down with me and my wife, and Coach Chasm offered me the job. And I thought that they had tremendous talent and had a great reserve which to play from, and with the Bayou Classic that was second to none at that time. So I went from watching the Bayou Classic on television one year to being the center of attraction the next year. And that's how I eventually came to Southern University.
Okay, I like it. So let me travel back to the left side of the football field and let me see if I can complete an out route on Mr. Aeneas Williams, right? Looking at your story. I mean, for me, I went to Florida State and I played all 4 years. You didn't play football until your junior year. And the odds of an individual, Aeneas, playing football not until their junior year and being able to get into the NFL, the odds are not in their favor. But for you being able to accomplish that, how did you make that become a reality, to say the least? Not playing until your junior year. You were a walk-on and eventually becoming one of the best cornerbacks to ever play in the game.
Well, one, I call it a God story. I want to first give kudos to Coach Richardson because, Coach, even though I never played for you, I knew a lot about you, not just from Sean, but from Kenyatta and a number of the guys who played for you. And Coach may remember, and I don't want to defer this, I just think there's a story about Sean Wallace that needs to be told. And Sean, who was my little mentee, BMAC at Southern, he was a freshman when I was a senior, or at least played my last year. He told me that when Coach Richardson got the job, and Coach, you can verify this, he said that you sat him down and told him how talented he was. I think it was Yoshida, your defense coordinator. Is that correct, Coach?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Said Coach Yoshida sat him down, told him how talented he was, but told him he had to play disciplined football in order to be successful. So you coming in just a few years later with that talent that I knew was on the team, and then taking that team and making a few changes and putting your expertise on the club, I still just want to make sure, B-Mac, that I don't leave this Zoom call without saying, Coach Pete Richardson, your work and your handprint on Southern University's football program is probably second to none. And I know they're all due respect to Coach Mumford, but I put you right up there with some of the greatest that have ever coached at the college football level, at any level. So kudos to you. Back to the God story, it was real simple. My dad's the first college graduate on both sides of the family, so he knew the difference. Sports wasn't our ticket out. I grew up in middle class part of Holly Grove. He made sure that we got education, and let's see, a week before, I had two teammates that were on Southern's team. Michael Lindsay, shout out to Michael Lindsay, who played also at Fortier and also played with the Giants defensive tackle. He was at Southern. Michael was 2 grades ahead of me. And Maurice Hurst, who played, as I mentioned earlier, played with me at Southern. Periodically in my freshman and sophomore year, Michael Lindsay, I would see him, and he was on the football team. Michael would ask me, B-Mac, he says, Aeneas, why don't you come walk on the football team? And then I had an uncle. Every time I went back home to New Orleans, when we were out of school, my Uncle William would always say, they called me Nikki in New Orleans, say, Nikki, why are you not playing football? I said, Unc, and I would tell Michael Lindsay, I'm through with it. You know, I didn't get recruited. That's over. But around my junior year in college, I end up giving my life to Jesus Christ. That's the first thing. And there are 2 things I wanted to know. I said, Lord, if you're real, because I grew up in church, it never made sense to me. I said, Lord, if you're real, show me how you relate to us as individuals, as human beings. First thing he said was the nature of purpose. The second thing he taught me is how he speaks to us through the heart. So B-Mac, a week before the season starts, my junior year in college, I was disappointed because that summer, I have a degree in accounting. That summer, Cargill, a Fortune 500 company, I did an on-campus interview, and then they invited me to the second interview where you have the on-campus visit to Cargill in Minneapolis. I just knew once you get the plant visit or you get to go to the company for an interview, is a foregone conclusion that you'll get the job. I didn't get the job. I was so disappointed. And it entered into my heart to go walk on the football team. I saw Michael Lindsay walking from the cafeteria, and he had already asked me this over the years, but this time he asked me, and I said, Michael, I'm going to walk on. And he didn't take me serious. It entered into my heart to walk on. A week before the season start, the guys had already been going through two-a-days for, I think, over a month. It enters in my heart. I go and I ask the defense coordinator, Coach Percy Dewitt. Shout out to Coach Percy Dewitt, one of the best coaches, defensive minds I've ever been around. He allowed me to walk on. My teammates, B-Mac, didn't like me at all. I'm walking on, and these cats they've been grinding for over 4 weeks, over 4 or 5 weeks. In the position, ironically, I was going out for, the coach was trying to replace the guy. Mm. And so, long story short, I end up starting by the 5th game of the season.
Wow. And the rest is history.
The rest, as they call it, is history.
No question. Marvelous story there. It's not about how you start, it's how you finish. And I can tell you this much, good thing they didn't hire you, because if they probably hired you, you wouldn't have played football.
Exactly. And that speaks to people's lives, because sometimes what people think is a no or a disappointment, a lot of times God has something bigger. I just didn't know.
No question. I tell something I say, when you look at when a door closes, 9 times out of 10, that foundation or that structure has another door. You just got to find it. I never
Correct.
seen a house has one door. Most houses have multiple doors, a front door, patio door, a back door. But one door closes in front of you. There's always another door. You just got to find it.
It's interesting, even as I just heard Coach Richardson share why he took the Southern job, but there were also some hesitation. There's some things, the coaching carousel, we call it. But yet, in spite of that, seeing the talent that was there, but also there had to be something inside he and his wife that would cause them to still make that decision, because it was a head coaching turnover. But there was still something besides just the talent that caused he and his wife to be comfortable. I know his brother was down here as well, but it was a decision that had to be made, and people need to know there will never be 100% guarantee of nothing, hardly. There still will be an element of fate where you still have to do it, even with some uncertainties.
No doubt. Great story, Aeneas Williams. Just not about how you start, it's how you finish. And like I said, man, you defied a lot of odds, being able to only start your junior year and become one of the best cornerbacks to do it in the National Football League, and ultimately getting that gold jacket into the Hall of Fame. Coach Richardson, when you look at the rich history of HBCU football, what stands out about the rich history. And I got a few cool nuggets I would like to share with our listeners and viewers. Southern has 81 players that have been drafted. 81 players. So when you look at the rich history, before we get to HBCU football, talk about the rich history that currently Southern has there in Baton Rouge.
Well, when you look at Southern University's program over nearly a number of years, they had some good quality players. And of course, at that time when I came down and made that jump to come to Southern University, I had to use a lot of players had winning attitudes like Aeneas Williams that came to Southern University, wasn't recruited. And those are the type of players we had to go after. But then over a period of time, we began to change those attitudes. Now, changing the players' attitudes is a tough thing to do, especially the biggest problem I had coming down to Southern University is just some of the high school coaches wasn't really convinced about HBCs at all. They did not push their players to play at HBCs, but we changed all that. And especially with the rich heritage, especially with Grambling and Southern playing in the Bayou Classic in New Orleans. I think that's the biggest selling point that you can start off with. If an individual coming out, especially an individual that we recruited, we didn't have a lot of five-star players on our football team, but we had a lot of winning players that had a winning attitude. A lot of players come to Southern University. Of course, Aeneas' parents went to school, had a rich lineage of coming to Southern University. And also with the idea of, we had to sell the idea, the educational aspect of it. I think I was telling some of the players that during that time that, I wasn't very big coming out of high school myself. I think I weighed about 165 pounds. And I went to University of Dayton at that time. And of course, I had two uncles, Mel and Bill Triplett, that played with the New York Giants at that time. And you always set your sights high. But regardless of who came in to recruit me, the only thing that my mom really wanted to hear is that they was going to make sure that at the end of the time that I got finished playing, that I was going to walk out of there with a degree. And the guy came in from all over, and apparently one time a guy came in from the University of Dayton, and he talked to my mom, and she said that he impressed on her and said, hey, if he has that opportunity, which if he's lucky, and that's not affordable to a whole lot of athletes, but the thing that I can control is I can control getting that degree and coming out of school. And that's how I got to the University of Dayton. And that's the same conviction I had kind of sell to my players when they came to me, when I came and recruit. We didn't have our facilities wasn't the greatest, but over a period of time, we developed that attitude. And I think you mentioned Sean Wallace. Sean Wallace, I played against him up in Shreveport, knew he was a great athlete. He played out of control at times, but once he got settled in, I think he developed into one of the finest football players that I ever coached. I mean, he changed the whole attitude on the team. His leadership as far as the winning attitude, and I think that's what you have to change. You don't change a person's values. The thing, a lot of times you change a person's behavior, and that's what we had to do at Southern University, to change their program around, because we had a lot going for us, which no other institution in the country that had us in Grambling was playing in that Bayou Classic. And a lot of players, when we played in that Bayou Classic, figured that we was just as good as anybody else in the country.
Yeah, and speaking of, just that rivalry between Southern and Grambling, that can transition into the entire rich history of HBCU football. And Aeneas, this question is for you. What goes through your mind when you go visit Canton and you see so many of your fellow HBCU players in the hall?
Well, first, B-Mac, going back, you mentioned 81 that have been drafted, but I could tell you on Southern's team and some of the players that Coach Richardson inherited, Coach Marino Chasm, the Godfather, and Coach Percy Dewey, those guys recruiting out of New Orleans and the whole region. I had so many guys on my team that were far more talented than I was. A number of them played in the pros, but a number of them didn't make it, but should have played. Mm-hmm. And as you said, B-Mac, you played at Florida State. Having been in the league 14 years, I know unequivocally that many of the guys, particularly skilled guys, had the ability to play in the National Football League if given the opportunity.
Yep.
As it relates to the Bayou Classic, in that game is nothing like it. And going in the hall and being around Willie Lanier, Morgan State, Mel Blount, obviously Southern, Charlie Jordan, all the guys that are from Grambling, it is literally humbling. Most time when I'm around them, because I'm the youngest, so it is the class of the Pro Football Hall of Fame class of 2014 literally had 3 HBCUs. One was Clyde Humphreys that played for Tennessee State, and the other many know is my good friend Michael Strahan. So can you imagine being in an induction class with 3 guys from HBCUs? And actually, we're the last class that had an HBCU Hall of Famer. And when I'm around those guys in the room, all I do is serve them. I listen to them. I learn from them because we stand on their shoulders. When you talk about the Bayou Classic, to play against Jake Reed, Fred Jones, and those guys, so many guys came out the SWAC, man. It's crazy. People wouldn't even believe it. I can literally go from Alabama State all the way through the SWAC and name guys, particularly wide receiver skill positions that played in the league. I like to say to any young person, Coach Richardson already mentioned it, Southern University, the Southern University, and B-Mac, the reason why I say the Southern University, it's an inside joke between me and a good friend, Orlando Pace, who played for the Ohio State University. So I always affectionately joke with him, the Southern University.
Yep.
Southern prepared me, as Coach Richardson said, to be able to compete, not just on the football field, but to be able to compete in life. Part of my job right now is serving as senior advisor and consultant to the vice president of football operations, the league commissioner, and to the owners. And one of the initiatives that Troy Vinson, the VP of football operations, has, that is to make students from HBCUs aware of all of the jobs that are available that are not on the field. So to be a part of those things and have these experiences and to know I've served with the past 2 administrations in the White House. What I'm saying to every young person that will hear this, every parent, you need to understand HBCU schools will wholeheartedly and within a culture prepare your children to be able to compete anywhere in the world.
That's huge. And talking about that tradition on the field, Harold Carmichael, I think he may get in this summer, right? If I'm not mistaken, and he went to Southern as well.
He's what we call a inductee.
Inductee, yeah. Because last year they didn't have the ceremony because of the pandemic. So this summer, hopefully, if everything goes accordingly, he will be able to be inducted the right, normal way. And looking at that rich history in HBCU football, 34 players in the hall. Aeneas is in there. Willie Brown, Walter Payton, Jackie Slater, Harry Carson, Deacon Jones, Donnie Shell, Mel Blount, Jerry Rice, Michael Strahan, Richard Dent, John Stallworth. We got Art Shell, Shannon Sharp. If you were to put together an all-time HBCU Hall of Fame team, I don't know if there's another, as you would say, Power 5. When you look at Power 5 football, and back then it wasn't Power 5 football, you know what I mean? But of course, when you look at some of the other blue blood universities and the conferences and things they're associated with, I don't know if there's another group of guys that could go toe-to-toe against that all-time HBCU team and with some of the names that I read off. So that's just a magnificent opportunity and feat for the guys that played through HBCUs and were able to go out and dominate and make to the highest level and be able to get into the Hall of Fame. So that's incredible. That's incredible. Now, when you look at the current state of HBCU football, the current state of Southern football, this is a rivalry, to say the least, or a game that you guys clearly have been tied to throughout your career there when you were there at Southern. Southern versus Jackson State. This upcoming Saturday, I know both of you guys will be tuned in. I know a lot of our fans, listeners and watchers, viewers will be tuned in as well. This game will be televised on ESPN this upcoming Saturday. I think it's slated for a 5 o'clock kickoff, if I'm not mistaken. History regarding this ball game. Southern leads the all-time series 34-29. Come on, Jackson State. Y'all gotta fight. Southern has won the past 7 meetings. Southern won the very first meeting, which happened in 1929, 98-0.
Wow.
98-0. I don't even know if you guys knew that, did you?
I didn't know that.
Shout out to Eric. Hey, I got a great producer.
Right.
All right. 98-0. And they had a 30-year hiatus where they didn't play for 30 years and then they got right back into it. And now, like I said, the all-time series goes in favor to Southern 34-29. Coach Dawson Odoms is the head coach. He's been there since 2012. Southern right now, they're 2-1. Jackson State, coached by Deion Sanders, prime time. They entered this ball game 3-1. What makes this rivalry so special? Starting off with you, Coach, first.
Well, this is a special rivalry, especially with Jackson State. It's really not that far away from Southern University, and we kind of recruit the same type of areas, that New Orleans area and working on up through there to Mississippi, where we know we have some fine athletes. But also, I think that they have a dynamic young coach that then came in there that's doing an outstanding job. That's getting the notoriety, the publicity for the HBCs again. Now, when you look at their programs, I think he has an outstanding program, outstanding young staff that he's dealing with. He's got an outstanding team also. Also, when you look at Southern University, those are probably two, besides the last couple of weeks, have played 2 or 3 games. The thing that I think that helped the HBCs a great deal, you talk about the COVID, and it's a deadly virus that's killed a whole lot of individuals, but I think it really opened up the light of a lot of individuals, especially high school coaches and high school players, with the exposure that they're getting, especially Jackson State at this time, because I think all of their games has been either on prime time or television that individuals had a chance to look and see what type of programs they have, what type of coaching they get, and also what type of competition they have. And also, when you look at that, the parents understand one thing, that when you go to an HBC, like Aeneas said, there's no guarantee that you're going to ever get an opportunity to go to the pros. But you can control what you can control, and that's walk across that stage at the end of 4 or 5 years. You control that with a little effort and a little discipline as far as from that aspect of it. But going into this game next week, I think it'll be a dynamic football game, playing against 2 historically great institutions. It's always been an exciting game. I don't care what the records are going into this football game. That game is almost comparable like the Bayou Classic. It's a rivalry that the players are looking forward to. From day one, you start looking at 2 games. You look at the Grambling game and you look at Jackson State game. And that's what you try to prime your thing to. Get into that aspect, knowing that you're going to be great competition. It's going to be an exciting game. And most of the time, it's going to have a packed house to it.
When I think of that game, they're probably playing Memorial Stadium there in Jackson. And I just had an opportunity to talk with Sean Gregory, B-Max. Sean Gregory was the quarterback at Jackson State when we upset Jackson State in Jackson State for their homecoming. Now, many may not know, Jimmy Smith, who eventually will be a Pro Football Hall of Famer, wide receiver that played with Jacksonville Jaguars. Mm-hmm. But many also forget about Tim Barnett. Tim was a 3rd or 4th round draft pick wide receiver with the Kansas City Chiefs, still lives in Kansas City. I'll never forget that game. I end up having a spectacular game. I think it was an interception return for a touchdown or a fumble recovery as well. We upset them. And Lim Barney, who's also in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Detroit Lions.
Yep. He was doing the broadcast. And literally after that game, and this was my 2nd year playing football. I played my 3rd year while in graduate school. Lim, after he broadcast the game, he ended up seeing my parents. He came up to my parents. He told my parents, and this is the first time they had heard this in the first time I had heard it. He told my parents, your son will be playing on Sundays. And I remember my dad telling me that it wasn't something that I thought a whole lot about, but it was something that he saw, even though I didn't see it at the time. But one of the biggest upsets in my entire college career was upsetting Jackson State for their homecoming. And I just talked to Sean Gregory for the first time since we were in school about 3 weeks ago. And he reminded me how upset he was to allow us to upset them during a homecoming.
Oh, man. It's one thing to beat your rivalry, but to beat them on their homecoming. Because, it's a football cliche. Anytime someone schedules you for their homecoming game, they're scheduling the team they believe they can beat.
Exactly.
That's a football cliche, but that's what we say. Oh, they schedule you for homecoming? Oh, they feel like they got an easy win.
Right.
Oh, that's super dope. That's super dope. So when you look at the current state of HBCU football, what has the addition of Deion Sanders meant, not just to the SWAC, but to HBCU football as a whole, Coach?
Well, I think he's been a great deal as far as coming in and to Jackson State with the exposure that he had in order to establish himself and the players of how they compete on television. I think a large part of his record is how the players play with the system that he's incorporated. He's got some fine assistant coaches, and also it speaks well for all HBCUs at this time. And I think another thing is ideal is that a lot of the major schools are not playing at this time, and that's regardless of people like to watch football. Now, whether it's 5 stars or whether it's the big time, it's football time, and somebody is going to watch that game, just like the Bayou Classic. People have, and they want to see some exciting football, 2 competitive teams. And they also get a chance to see exactly some players that was a little too small to develop in the last couple of years and developing to find football players that will get an opportunity to jump to that next level. And without that, a lot of the exposure that you need is like anything else. The more time people get an opportunity to see you play, the more you're going to turn some people's head. And I think if you watch that game this Saturday, some of the players that they have on both football teams are going to turn, and they're very talented athletes on both teams.
And I want to make sure to give a shout out to Coach Odoms, who's also been very consistent as the head coach of Southern University. Dion and I talk on a regular basis. And as a fellow Seminole, B-Mac, you may understand, Dion was in line to get the Florida State head coaching job. And I want all to know this is not a stopgap. Dion knew, because Dion was one of the first ones to bring to the attention to the league office that we needed to have a combine specifically for kids that were from HBCUs. Mm-hmm. He and I go to the NFL draft in Indianapolis every year. And a couple of years ago, noticed that there were very few, maybe one and maybe zero of kids from HBCUs. So we broached that subject, or he broached it in prior to the pandemic, I believe at the matter of fact, this month, last year, the last weekend of the month, which would have been this weekend, the NFL was going to host their first historical Black college university combine for the top 50 football players coming out of HBCUs. And it was going to be first class. So one of the things my dad said all the time, he says, son, it's not what people don't know that hurt them. It's what they do know that's not true. One thing Dion has been he's been coaching at the high school level. Mm-hmm. So it's not like he just got a job. So he's been coaching at the high school level in football. And that's where a lot of coaches start. They start at the lower level. But then now he's at Jackson State. But it's not just a stopgap. Now, any coach can get offered a job and take it. But I can tell you from my conversations with him, he's not there just to make this a stopgap. He literally is recruiting kids that are recruited by all the Power 5 schools. And Dion has brought, and Coach mentioned something earlier about the Bayou Classic. Southern University and Grambling have the organic national exposure with the Bayou Classic. So one of the things that Dion has brought to HBCUs is the power of media. Mm. and the understanding of how to get media to put cameras on your kids. Because why do we see some guys come to the league, you know this, B-Mac, and they played at all these Power 5 schools and may have been at what we call great and drafted in the first round, but turn out don't do anything. It's because every week that camera was on them. And when the camera is on you, you playing pretty decent, you go from what they call an average guy to all of a sudden, because cameras are on you, now people infer greatness on you, even though you don't have it. So one thing Dion is doing is awakening all of our HBCU coaches. Number one, going to the NFL, you may never make it, but it certainly should be something you believe is possible going to HBCU, particularly these kids who now with the civil unrest and all the exposure, all the great people, not just athletes that have gone to these HBCUs. Now we have somebody the second highest position in our land, Howard University. So when all of a sudden the spotlight, the media see this, hold up, what's up? We were going to these big schools and a lot of these kids don't even play. That's the crazy thing. They go to these big schools and they may not play, but they'll go to HBCU and they have to understand it's not a step down. You may have bigger budgets, but you'll still get exposure. And that's what Dion is using, the power of the media to bring the camera and let them know we got kids and athletes at these schools and they need to be seen.
Yeah, speaking of job, go ahead, Coach.
I think you're right, Aeneas. A lot of athletes at the HBCs just hadn't been given an opportunity because they don't want you to compete. Once they get an idea that they can compete with the Division I players, which I think helps them out a great deal. But when you don't have, I think it's ideal to have this combine just for the HBK athletes, because once they understand they got a power to prove, and a lot of them have, when they get that opportunity to go out and compete, especially with the guys from the big schools, you'll find that they're just as competitive. Absolutely. And they just hadn't had the opportunity. Fundamentally, you're finding too, a lot of HBC is getting some dynamic young coaches because especially the Black individuals are beginning to come down to the HBCs because they're convincing their parents that they can have the same quality of coaching, because the only thing they're looking for is the individual that has the right attitude and as I'm able to coach this individual, because a lot of them are great athletes. The thing that a lot of professional ranks are concerned about is the basic fundamentals. Do they have enough of them coming out of the college? With the great young coaches coming in from this time, being able to teach them basic fundamentals, once they find that they get a little bigger and stronger and they can compete, they're hard to keep off that bracket. And they're going to jump as soon as they get an opportunity, which a lot of them haven't been given the opportunity. Like you mentioned, the last 2 or 3 years, even at the combines maybe they had 1 or 2 HBC athletes altogether. Now, when you look at the teams that they usually have, the one or 2 athletes that they have at a lot of those combines, there's probably 8 or 10 other athletes in that whole league that's probably better than them that never had the exposure that those athletes had. Mm-hmm. And that's what this combine is going to give those young athletes a chance to show how they're fundamentally sound, just as good as the larger schools.
Yeah, and also too, when you look at the combine, that's designated for HBCU football players, they also have, I think it's the Legacy Bowl that will start this year, and it's like the Senior Bowl for HBCU players. That's another opportunity for HBCU players to be seen from these NFL organizations. So when you talk about opportunities for both of you guys, and I start with you first, Coach, opportunities for potential NFL players, they're starting to intensify, to say the least, with the combine that you guys just alluded to, and of course the Senior Bowl, the Legacy Bowl, similar to what the Senior Bowl is for Power 5 and other conferences that are associated in NCAA. But what opportunities could be, I guess, brought for high school recruits, right? Because what we're starting to see now, especially with basketball, we're starting to see some top flight basketball recruits turn down Power 5 offers to go to HBCU. Number one example, McCord Maker. right? He was a 5-star recruit, 5-star prospect that selected Howard over top Power 5 programs. He became the highest ranked recruit to join an HBCU in the modern era. And a few days ago, Master P, who we had on the show a few months ago, his son, Hersey Miller, a 3-star prospect, just selected Tennessee State a few days ago. But when you look at football, we're not really seeing some of these top tier recruits turn down Power 5 offers. So my question to both of you guys, starting with you, Coach, what could be done to get more opportunities for these big time recruits? Because I was a big time recruit coming out of South Florida. And I remember FAMU sent me a letter, and I looked at the letter and I was like, if I'm going to Tallahassee, I'm going to Tallahassee for Florida State. But now the attention is starting to shift just a bit, and people are starting to look at HBCU football in a different light than what it was in years past. But what else could be done to be able to get these recruits to strongly consider HBCU football when they have so many different Power 5 teams coming at them?
Well, I think the main thing that a lot of HBCs they're underfunded. A lot of the athletic budgets are really restricted, so you're not able to really get out and do a great job of recruiting. But what's been happened in the past few years is that a lot of games that have been coming on, especially like Bayou Classic, now they're bringing in the Legacy Bowl. A lot of parents, when you go in to recruit, the only thing the parents are really concerned about is one issue: whether he's able to get an education. Now, the rest of that, whether he goes to the professional ranks, is entirely up to the player and the coaching development of that athlete. But when you go in and talk to the parents now, and let's face it, a lot of parents now are getting a lot more exposure and intelligence of what they're looking for, because a lot of parents now, when they came, they also was involved with, the mom was a basketball or a track player, and the dad was probably 3 athlete sports. So they understand exactly what's going on, especially in athletics, where the prime goal, I think the major thing that can happen that I've seen now is that the process has gone from a lot to more greed involved. And so with that aspect involved, the parents are concerned from that aspect of whether little Johnny is going to be able to walk across that stage at the end of 4 or 5 years. That means more to them now. And so if you find a coach that can get out there and get the exposure they need and sit down and intelligently watch the player development at a lot of these schools like Jackson or SU or Grambling, Tennessee State, they're beginning to get those quality athletes. And I think the parents are really not concerned on that level. The only thing they're really concerned about is whether he's going to be able to graduate in 4 or 5 years. Like I mentioned before, the rest of that is up to the athlete as far as how much he's going to make a commitment to at least get that opportunity. And if he does, and I tell a lot of the parents from the aspect, your son or daughter is going to have to work. If say he gets an opportunity to play, I think the average playing time of a professional athlete, especially in football, is maybe 5 years anyway. Mm-hmm. But little Johnny has to work another 25 or 30 years. What he's going to do once he gets playing, and that's what you have to sell. And I think a lot of young coaches is also selling that aspect of the game of the HBCs, because they see the type of quality athletes that they have, the exposure that they're getting. Now it's up to the parents to make that decision for them.
Piggyback somewhat on what Coach is saying. When it comes down to, there's a statement that says you got to strike while the iron is hot. Because of the social injustice, because of just consciousness being awakened, I just did a national interview about a month ago with the USA Today newspaper, and it was in reference with the influx of kids that were going to HBCU that were non-African American. That's part of what the story was about. Well, the truth is, all of those that are in these countries, these are great institutions. They're not just great institutions for people of color. They're great institutions for anyone that chooses to come and major there and put in the work. When it comes down to now that kids are now strongly considering, as you mentioned in basketball, the key now is first, whoever that head coach is at each of our HBCUs, They have to truly believe in their heart. In terms of getting an education, that's foundational. We shouldn't even have to talk about that. That's number one. Then after that, that kid who's a 5-star, 4-star, that kid wants to go and have an opportunity to play in the National Football League. So I have to now first get that kid to believe that it's possible at my school. The first person that has to convince that kid that it's possible is the head coach. If that coach does real in his heart don't believe it's possible, he won't talk about it and the kid will recognize it. I know and I believe there are 4-star, 3-stars, and maybe even some 5-star kids that will come to our schools, even though Southern's budget may never be as big as LSU, but they're low-hanging fruit. There should never be a Bayou Classic where you're not mentioning the guys that are in the Hall of Fame that played for Grambling and played for Southern. You should do something. We won't charge you anything. That's free. That's what I call free advertisement. Mm-hmm. That's the part that Dion actually brought to the game. Use it. You may not do it as much posting as he does, but certainly there's an aspect of it that a small budget and some kids that are in school can literally control your narrative through putting content and stories and make it a part of the media department's training for the younger kids. It's not like you need super experts to do this. A lot of these kids, all the way before they even get to school, they know how to navigate these things. So you just said 81 guys have been drafted. You also said, I think, 34 in the Hall of Fame. Is that right, B-Mac?
34, yep.
That should be talked about all the time, because the first thing you need the parents and the kid to believe that it's possible.
Yep.
It's possible. Is it possible? And I know it is. I know it is. Whoever's listening to this, I'm telling you, I've seen them. I go to the combine every year. I see it. I know there are kids on these teams that we're missing out on, and I'm so glad the league has really seriously begun to look, because the league is so much better when they continue to expand the ponds and the rivers and the lakes that they fish in. And it certainly should be fishing in our HBCU schools.
Oh, that's big time. That is definitely big time. I tell you this much, like you said, Aeneas, I mean, the iron is hot right now. It's super hot. So you got to take advantage of the opportunities because of what has been going on socially around us. Coach, before we let you go, can you tell us a little bit about the Overtime Academy?
Well, I think I was introduced it a while back about mental health. Mm-hmm. And I think I see a great deal of athletes, even though they have outstanding athletic ability, a lot of them technically coming from areas that need some help. And I think anytime that you can extend an olive branch to those athletes, especially mentally, to make them academically sound and being able to move on forth from up that. But this academy, I think, is going to help a great deal of identifying some of these issues that individuals have. Not only that, giving them some help that they need, because a lot of individuals, you get in a situation where people tell you that you can't be successful. And then pretty soon, if you start believing that, then you're not going to try. I think thing with the HBCs that a lot of parents has to understand is that the quality of education and also the coaching aspect now, with the dynamic young coaches coming into our conference, can see that when their son or daughter leaves the HBC, that they're just as qualified as anybody in the country. I don't care what profession that they choose to go into.
Coach, what resources are available to support the Overtime Academy?
Well, I think I'm not attuned to that area exactly yet, because I really hadn't been involved from that aspect of it. The only thing I'm doing is trying to get them off to a solid start and making sure we reach out to a lot of players to get the exposure that we need, that they can get some help if the help is needed.
Yeah, I can tell you this much. Most people don't realize when it comes to athletics, mental health and athletics, they're tied to the hip. You know what I mean? Because if you're not together mentally, 9 times out of 10, you won't be together, whatever it is you're supposed to be doing, whether it's catching passes or trying to make 3-pointers. So they're tied to the hip. And that's a great thing that you're being a part of. And I can tell you this much. We all will listen to a guy like yourself, Coach Richardson, because you've been through the fire, extremely wise, and you know exactly what you're talking about. But before we let both of you guys go, I would like to add a quick superlative part to this show. Rapid fire questions, quick answers, honest answers, unbiased answers. Number 1 for you, Coach, and Aeneas, I'll give you a different question. Best team you ever coached throughout your entire time there at Southern? The year, the record.
Come on, Coach. Get some of your players mad at you.
I don't want to put. I had some great football teams. I think,
Coach, I need one. I need your best team, Coach. I need your best team, Coach.
He has to be a politician. Come on, B-Mac. Come on, man.
I think I had some great, outstanding football teams, and all of them made a major contribution to Southern University. And I think anytime you have the number of quality athletes that they went out and established and became good citizens, and establish SU's name throughout the country, not only as engineers, as nurses, as doctors, and that's much as important as being an athlete to me, is once they leave there, they leave with the qualifications that they need to be successful. And I think if they can do that, then Southern University is successful.
Okay, well, I'm going to make it a little easier for you then, Coach. All right. Best team you coached that didn't win a championship at Southern?
Oof. Well, first of all, I didn't lose too many championships.
I know, but the best team that you were a part of that didn't win it all.
Oh man, there you go again. It's
right. You're trying to tell something, Mac. He's trying to get some viewership. He's trying to get some likes on this, man. You know, commercial.
Hey, Coach, this is great barbershop talk because you know it's going to be a lot of people that's tied to Southern that might hear this or see this and be having these discussions in the barbershop. So give us some barbershop talk.
What I'm talking about, all of my teams were very competitive, and right. I think to set one above the other, I think all of them ought to be proud with the time that they walked out of Southern University to what they established at this time. I think Coach Odoms has, as far as this facilities now, is probably second to none as far as the HBCs, and because of that, from that aspect of what some of the players and the teams that we had in the past really made a major contribution to getting that, and all of them should be proud of Southern University at this time. So to pick one team in front of the other, I'm not going to do that because I think all of them played a major part setting their legacy for Southern University at this time.
Hey, Coach, all great coaches think alike. They can't pick one. They're not going to pick one. I tried, and you passed. You passed. I'm not surprised. You passed. All right, so Aeneas, I'm going to transition to you. Best player you played against while at Southern that didn't get to the NFL or didn't have a lengthy career in the NFL?
Wow, that's a good question. I would say Fred Jones. Okay. Fred, I think, was drafted in the 3rd round. He was a receiver. He and Jake Reed were on Gramblin's team. And I think Fred was drafted in the 3rd round of Kansas City Chiefs. I don't know how long he played, but I don't think he played long. But Fred certainly is one of those guys, and probably Tim Burnett if I would do a 1A. But B-Mac, I wanted to share something in reference with the Overtime Academy that Ezra and the guys introduced me to. Just as coach, I don't know a whole lot about it, but I do understand in terms of mental challenges and mental health. A lot of times I was just talking to someone, the things you forget about when you grow up. I literally saw my cousin dead laying across the tracks, and we all stand around looking at him. And what people don't realize, stuff that we call normal. Like if somebody gets shot in certain neighborhoods, the people are going to leave the neighborhood. Like we leaving, we moving. Like it's not like we're going to stay in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. But in some of these neighborhoods where our kids come out of, man, these are normal everyday things. So the mental challenge of even overcoming stuff that we think is normal, that's really not normal. It takes the mental health and some components of how to overcome and properly assess and remind ourselves that we're still human beings. Because when you're in some of these environments, man, and it's fighting, it's guns, man. My high school in New Orleans was the first high school to have metal detectors. So it's just crazy. Seeing out literally when I was in junior high school at Carter G. Woodson, the school where a lot of the high schools recruited from, my teammate got shot while we were practicing. We were on the ground with our face to the ground, and cats were shooting in the park.
Wow.
That's from the Magnolia Project, Carter G. Woodson, right across the street. And so what I'm saying, this stuff not normal. So a lot of times you got a kid trying to get an education. We first got to help him realize, man, get back to some normalcy and also acknowledge, hey, man, this is not normal. And that's why Overtime Academy and what the guys are doing are so important. But those are the guys. Fred Jones is the guy from Grambling, to answer your question.
Okay, good answer. And once again, shout out to Overtime Academy doing big things, touching a lot of souls. Last question for you guys. Same question. Coach, I'm going to make it super easy for you. And I know you got to have an answer for me for this question. Score prediction for this Saturday's ball game, Southern versus Jackson State.
Well, I'm going to be biased to SU. I don't know. It's going to be a good football game, and I think it's going to be a lower scoring game. So I would say SU is going to win 2017.
2017. Aeneas?
I got the Southern University winning 24-17.
The Southern University. I got to start saying that. The Southern University. Man, it was an honor having you two iconic individuals on here sharing this time with me, highlighting Southern University, highlighting the tradition there, highlighting the tradition in HBCU football. Coach, man, you still sharp as a knife. And Aeneas, you're doing great things, highlighting HBCU in totality, man. It's a pleasure having you here on All Things Covered. Make sure you guys check out the ball game this upcoming Saturday. Southern traveling to Jackson State, an outstanding rivalry in HBCU history. Southern leads this series 34-29, and they're on a 7-game streak when you look at the last 7 meetings. So hopefully they can get to that magical number of 8. And I think Coach Odom and the rest of the Southern team will be excited, and I know these two individuals will be excited as well. So thank you for joining me here, All Things Covered. Patrick Peterson and Brian McFadden. It's a magnificent show. Make sure you guys record, save, lock it, and re-listen to it. You definitely will learn a lot.